It began like something out of a television courtroom. But this time, it wasn't entertainment. Officer Jarvis Duncan never imagined he'd find himself sitting across from his own stepdaughter, facing her not in a family living room, but under the cold lights of a courtroom. The echo of the bailiff's voice cut through the silence. "Order. All rise." It was official now. A father and daughter stood on opposite sides of the law, one in uniform, one in shame. Jarvis Duncan had worn the badge for nearly 2 decades. 18 years of chasing criminals, restoring order, and protecting others from deceit. But nothing in his training had prepared him for the quiet kind of crime that crept into his own home. Jessica Thomas wasn't just any suspect. She was the young girl he'd helped raise since she was barely old enough to spell her own name. For 19 years, he'd been her stepfather, guiding, providing, and disciplining when needed. Together with his wife, they had built a family, 3 children in all, 2 of them 9-year-old twins who still believed their big sister could do no wrong. That belief, however, was about to be shattered. It started months earlier, with something small, a missing check. Jessica had been struggling, trying to balance raising her own children and surviving in a tough economy. When Jarvis discovered the fraudulent check, it cut deep. But he told himself duty was duty. The law couldn't bend just because blood was involved. So he made a painful decision. He had her prosecuted. Jessica spent 10 days in jail and paid a fine. He told himself it was for her own good, that maybe the experience would shake her awake, help her change. But even as she walked out of that jail, her eyes cold and distant, he knew something had been broken between them that might never be repaired. Weeks turned into months, and the house on Maple Street seemed normal again. Dinners, laughter, visits from family. Jessica would still come by on holidays, or drop in for Sunday dinners. She hugged her little siblings, smiled at her mother, and even thanked Jarvis for still letting her be around. He wanted to believe her. But in January of 2013, things started disappearing. First small items, then more valuable ones. A gold bracelet he'd worn for years vanished from the dresser. His wife's watch was gone from the jewelry box. The camcorder, filled with family memories, disappeared from the closet. Even an iPad used for work couldn't be found. Money from a drawer went missing too, but that, he knew, would be impossible to trace. Jarvis didn't want to believe what the evidence whispered. Maybe it was misplaced. Maybe someone else had come by. But his instincts, the same instincts that had solved dozens of theft cases, told him something wasn't right. He started investigating quietly, without accusations, without confrontation. He checked pawn shops in the area, searching through receipts and asking questions like any detective would. Then, one day, he found it. A pawn ticket, bearing a familiar name, Jessica Thomas. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper. The bracelet, the watch, the camcorder, all listed clearly. But what truly sealed it was the fingerprint. The faint swirl of lines pressed in black ink across the ticket. He compared it to the one in the police records from her earlier arrest. It matched perfectly. When he confronted his wife, her reaction was disbelief, followed by devastation. "Maybe there's a mistake," she insisted. "Maybe Jessica pawned her own things." But Jarvis knew better. The dates matched, the descriptions were too specific, and the items were unmistakably theirs. His heart felt heavy as stone. He'd taken oaths to uphold justice, but this was justice he'd give anything to avoid. And so, here they were, in Judge Judy's courtroom. The cameras rolled, the audience whispered, and the family sat fractured in front of the world. Judge Judy listened with her usual sharp precision, cutting through emotion with the blade of logic. Her voice was calm but piercing as she asked the questions no parent wants to hear. "Mr. Duncan, Miss Thomas is your stepdaughter?" "Yes." "You've been her stepfather for 19 years?" "Yes." You prosecuted her before for cashing a fraudulent check? Yes. Each yes seemed heavier than the last, like stones building a wall between them. Jessica sat there, eyes downcast, her voice defensive but trembling. I've pawned a lot of things over time, she said. I don't know what he's talking about. Maybe it's one of my own. But Judge Judy wasn't one to entertain vague denials. She leaned forward, holding the pawn ticket between her fingers like a piece of evidence in a crime film. This is a 14-karat gold bracelet, she said firmly. Are you saying you owned this exact item? Jessica hesitated, looking at the floor. I've pawned things before, she repeated, softer this time. I just don't remember. The courtroom air grew still. The truth, unspoken but undeniable, hung between them. For Jarvis, it wasn't about the money or the jewelry. It was about the trust, the invisible thread that holds families together. He remembered the years he'd spent teaching her right from wrong, the times he'd tucked her in at night, the way she used to run to him when she scraped her knee. All those moments now felt distant, faded behind a layer of betrayal he couldn't scrub clean. Even his badge, once a symbol of pride, now felt like a burden. Upholding the law had always been simple, until it meant standing against his own daughter. Judge Judy, ever the voice of hard truth, summed it up with compassion buried beneath her firmness. This is a sad case, she said, because it's not just about theft, it's about family. It's about a man who has to decide between justice and forgiveness, and a daughter who doesn't yet understand the damage she's done. Her words pierced the silence like the final gavel strike. After the hearing, the family walked out quietly. The cameras turned off, the audience left, and only the echoes of judgment remained. Jessica avoided her stepfather's eyes, her own glistening with tears she refused to let fall. His wife stood between them, torn by love and disappointment. Jarvis adjusted his police cap, not out of pride but out of habit, a ritual of control when life felt uncontrollable. Outside, the cold air hit his face. For the first time, he felt the true weight of the badge, not the one pinned to his chest, but the one carved into his heart as a father. He didn't hate her. That was the hardest part. Beneath all the anger and betrayal, he still saw the little girl who once called him Dad. But he also knew that love without accountability is just weakness dressed as forgiveness. Maybe someday, Jessica would understand. Maybe one day, she'd look back and see what she'd broken, and what it cost him to do the right thing. In the end, Duncan versus Thomas wasn't just a courtroom case. It was a story about boundaries, loyalty, and the painful truth that even family ties can be tested by human flaws. It was the kind of case Judge Judy had seen 100 times. But for Officer Duncan, it was the only one that ever truly mattered. He walked away not as a victor, but as a man trying to make peace with the fact that justice sometimes comes at the cost of love. And in that quiet moment, under the gray Los Angeles sky, the lawman and the father inside him stood side by side, neither one truly winning, neither one truly losing, both forever changed.